Native Americans have always been warriors. Long before the stars and stripes flew over this land, their ancestors fought to protect the plains, the rivers, and the sacred ground beneath their feet. So when America called them to war again, they didn't hesitate. From remote reservations in the Southwest to the forests of the Great Lakes, Native American men and women stepped forward. They volunteered in higher numbers than any other ethnic group in the United States. They fought in Europe, in the Pacific, in Korea, in Vietnam, not for glory, and not always for a country that treated them fairly. They fought because the warrior spirit ran deep in their blood. Before we go further, consider subscribing to U.S. Veteran Tales. These are the voices history often leaves out. And together, we're bringing them back to life. During World War II alone, over 44,000 Native Americans served in the U.S. military. That's not a typo. At the time, Native Americans made up less than 1% of the U.S. population. And yet, their participation rate was among the highest of any group. Many weren't even citizens. The United States had only granted full citizenship to Native Americans in 1924, just 18 years before the war. Some had never left their tribal land. Some didn't speak English. But when war came, they came too. Their families held ceremonies before they left. Prayers, songs, sacred feathers tucked into uniforms. They weren't just joining the Army or the Marines. They were stepping into a warrior's path, one that had been passed down for generations. And then they shipped out. They landed in Normandy. They froze in the Ardennes. They waded ashore at Iwo Jima. Some fired rifles, others patched wounds. A few carried radios and spoke a language that would help win the war. They were the Navajo code talkers. The U.S. military was struggling. Every code they created, the Japanese eventually cracked. But then someone had a radical idea. Use a language the enemy had never even heard of. The Navajo language was unlike any other. No alphabet, no written form, no textbooks, and hardly anyone outside the tribe could understand it. In 1942, the Marines recruited 29 young Navajo men to build a code using their native tongue. It worked. From that point on, Navajo code talkers transmitted messages across the battlefield, lightning fast, crystal clear, and completely unbreakable. One Marine officer later said, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." But when those young men came home, they couldn't tell anyone what they had done. Their work was classified. No one knew they were heroes, not even their families. And they weren't alone. Native Americans have fought in every U.S. war, from the Revolutionary War to the present day. But recognition, rare. Benefits, often denied. And respect, sometimes never offered. In 1919, after World War I, Choctaw veteran Otis Wanaho returned from France decorated with medals. He walked into a diner in Oklahoma and was told to eat outside. Whites only, the sign said. He had risked his life for a country that wouldn't let him eat at the same table. When the Vietnam War came, the story repeated itself. Thousands of Native American young men answered the draft or volunteered. On some reservations, over 25% of all men served in Vietnam, a rate far above the national average. They served with distinction as scouts, trackers, medics, snipers. Many carried deep pride for the uniform, seeing military service as a continuation of traditional warrior culture. But when they came back, there were no welcome home parades, no thank yous, no job offers, no understanding. They returned to reservations plagued by poverty, alcoholism, and systemic neglect. Many suffered from PTSD. Some turned to addiction. Others, tragically, took their own lives. They had fought overseas, only to come home and fight a quieter, lonelier battle. Imagine this. You go to war for a country that once forced your grandparents into boarding schools, banned your language, and stripped away your land. You return home, and that country barely acknowledges you. That's what it meant to be a Native American veteran, a soldier, a ghost, a contradiction. They were told they weren't American enough to vote, but American enough to bleed. And yet, they kept showing up. Why? Because for many Native peoples, serving in the military was more than duty. It was sacred, to protect the land, to honor the ancestors, to defend the people. In Lakota culture, warriors were considered protectors of the community. In the Navajo tradition, the warrior walked in beauty, balancing strength and spirituality. In the Ojibwe and Apache, the warrior carried teachings, not just weapons. Service was not just patriotism. It was spiritual. But the world outside didn't see that. They saw brown faces in green uniforms. And then, too often, they looked away. The Navajo code talkers were finally honored in 2001, nearly 6 decades after their service. By then, many had already passed on. There are still no national memorials dedicated solely to Native American veterans, no required school lessons, no federal holiday in their name. Their legacy lives in whispered stories, in old uniforms folded away, in medals tucked in drawers, in a granddaughter's curiosity, in a grandson's pride. But not all has been lost. In the last decade, Native communities have begun reclaiming these stories. Memorials are rising on reservations. Elders are telling tales that were once too painful to share. Ceremonies are held each year to honor the forgotten. In South Dakota, a Lakota elder drums every Veterans Day not for applause but for healing. In Arizona, a young woman learns that her great-grandfather was a code talker. She prints his photo, frames it, and places it where the sun hits it each morning. The stories are still here, waiting, whispering, refusing to disappear. And if you're still listening, you're now part of that remembering. If these voices matter to you, subscribe to U.S. Veteran Tales. Together, we can keep the memory alive, one story at a time. When Native American soldiers came home from war, they didn't find banners or brass bands. They found silence, and sometimes shame. Some returned to reservations where nothing had changed, poverty, broken infrastructure, and a government that had never kept its promises. Others returned to cities where no one understood what they had done or who they were. The war had changed them. But America hadn't changed at all. Robert, a Lakota man from Pine Ridge, came home from Vietnam in 1971. He carried shrapnel in his leg and nightmares in his mind. For years, he tried to hold steady work, tried to keep his drinking under control, but the memories didn't fade. He would wake in a cold sweat, clutching at the air. Loud noises made him hit the ground. Crowds made him panic. He once said, "I survived Vietnam, but I don't think I survived coming back." Robert wasn't alone. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't show up on X-rays or in award ceremonies. It hides in the dark places of the mind. Among Native American veterans, PTSD rates are significantly higher than the national average. Some studies estimate that up to 30% of Native vets experience severe symptoms, and many never received treatment. Why? Because help isn't always available on the reservation. Because cultural stigma tells men not to speak of their pain. Because too many of them simply feel forgotten. In the 1980s, a Vietnam veteran from the Choctaw Nation told a journalist, "The war ended for everyone else, but ours never did." He was right. The trauma didn't stay overseas. It came home, and it found fertile ground in communities already struggling with historical trauma. Centuries of forced removal, boarding schools, broken treaties, and government neglect. For Native veterans, the war was just another layer in a long, bitter history of loss. At the same time, the U.S. government often failed to deliver on its promises. The Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, is meant to provide health care, support, and benefits to veterans. But for Native Americans living in rural reservations, access was and remains limited. Some have to drive hours just to see a VA doctor. Others get lost in the paperwork. Language barriers, distrust of federal institutions, and cultural misunderstandings only deepen the divide. Imagine this. You risk your life for a country, and when you return home, the nearest clinic that's supposed to help you is 3 hours away and doesn't understand your background, your culture, or your pain. This is not a distant past. This is still happening today. Then there's the problem of recognition. Many Native American veterans have no recorded history of their service, no paperwork, no medals, no photos. Some were told by recruiters that their tribal names were too hard to pronounce, so they were assigned Anglo names. Others were enlisted under different spellings, making their records nearly impossible to trace. Generations later, their families struggled to prove they served at all. There are thousands of Native American graves with no military markers, no symbols, no acknowledgement, only silence. In some cases, the very culture they fought to preserve had been erased from their lives. During the 20th century, Native children were taken from their homes and sent to boarding schools, where they were forbidden from speaking their language, wearing their regalia, or practicing their spiritual beliefs. Some of those children grew up to be soldiers. They went to war wearing American uniforms, even as their identity had been stripped away. They defended a flag that once flew over schools where they were punished for being who they were. This is the paradox of Native service. Fighting for a country that tried to erase you. And yet, the warrior spirit endured. Even in the face of hardship, many Native American veterans continued to serve, not just in the military, but in their communities. Some became mentors. Others helped fellow vets navigate the VA system. A few used traditional healing practices, sweat lodges, drumming, ceremony, to begin the long road back from trauma. In some tribes, veterans are held in high honor, not just on holidays, but every day. At powwows across the country, veterans often lead the grand entry, carrying flags and eagle staffs, walking with quiet pride. These are not just parades. They are rituals of survival. Still, many battles remain. Native American veterans face higher rates of homelessness, unemployment, and suicide than nearly any other group of former service members. A 2012 report found that Native vets were twice as likely to be living in poverty compared to non-Native veterans. Twice as likely to suffer from alcohol-related illness. Twice as likely to feel invisible. One veteran from the Tohono O'odham Nation said it plainly, "We wore the uniform. We carried the rifle. We bled. But when we came back, no one saw us." But there is hope. In recent years, new initiatives have begun to rise from the very ground once soaked in silence. Veteran centers tailored specifically to Native communities are opening, offering culturally relevant therapy, traditional healing, and legal aid for benefits claims. Some Native-run nonprofits are helping families find long-lost service records. Others are organizing memorials, recording oral histories, and restoring dignity to grave sites. And perhaps most powerful of all, veterans are telling their stories, not to seek pity, not to demand praise, but to be heard. There's the story of Samuel, a Hopi vet who never spoke of Vietnam for 40 years, until his granddaughter asked. He told her everything in one night, crying through each word. She recorded it, typed it, and submitted it to the National Native American Veterans Memorial. There's the story of Maya, a female veteran from the Cheyenne tribe who fought in Iraq. When she came home, she founded a women's warrior circle to support other Native women veterans. Her motto, "We heal together." And there's the story of Joseph, a Navajo elder who never left the reservation, but who still walks out each sunrise, salutes the east, and whispers the names of the brothers he lost in 1944. Their stories do not ask for medals. They ask for memory. What does it mean to serve a country that still doesn't see you? For Native veterans, it means carrying both pride and pain. It means honoring two flags, the stars and stripes, and the tribal banners of their people. It means walking in two worlds, never fully accepted in either, but never surrendering to silence. They fought in foreign lands, and they came home to forgotten places. But in the next part of this story, we'll explore how they began to heal through culture, community, and the warrior spirit that never left them. Until then, remember, the stories of Native veterans aren't history. They are still happening. They had returned home to silence, to poverty, to ghosts, but they never laid down their spirit. The warrior in Native tradition is not just one who fights, it is one who protects, one who endures, one who heals, and slowly, across tribal nations and forgotten corners of America, the healing began. In a small Navajo community near Shiprock, New Mexico, a group of elders gathers twice a month, not to talk about the war, but to drum, to pray, and to sit in ceremony. Most of them are veterans. All of them carry memories they don't speak of easily. They don't call it therapy. They call it coming back into balance. One man, a Vietnam veteran, once said, "The government gave me pills. My people gave me song." Across Indian country, traditional healing ceremonies have become a quiet force in the recovery of Native veterans. Sweat lodges cleanse the body and spirit. Talking circles give space to speak, cry, and remember. Smudging with sage, cedar, or sweetgrass purifies grief that words cannot reach. These aren't rituals of the past. They are survival tools of the present. For many Native veterans, modern medicine helps. But it's not enough. The trauma of war is tangled in the trauma of history. Healing must reach both. In Oklahoma, at a Choctaw veteran gathering, a man stands before a fire. He places tobacco into the flames and whispers names: brothers lost in Korea, cousins who didn't make it back from Afghanistan. No music, no speeches, just smoke rising into the stars. He doesn't call himself a hero. He calls himself a rememberer. And the remembering has grown louder. In 2020, after decades of silence, the National Native American Veterans Memorial opened in Washington, D.C. Set on the grounds of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, It is a circular structure of stone and water surrounded by lances for tribal offerings. It is simple, powerful, sacred. There are no bronze generals, no tanks, no bombs, only space to stand, to feel, and to honor. On its first day, hundreds of Native veterans gathered. Some walked with canes, others in full regalia. They came from the Hopi Mesas, the Alaskan tundra, the Lakota plains, the Hawaiian Islands. One elder brought a photo of his father from World War I. Another laid down an eagle feather wrapped in red cloth. They came not just to be seen, but to show the world they had always been here. Recognition matters. But even more powerful is the return to identity. For years, Native veterans were asked to choose between country and culture, between flag and feathers, between uniform and regalia. Now, more are saying, we don't have to choose, we are both. At powwows, Native veterans often lead the grand entry, carrying tribal flags alongside the U.S. flag. The drumbeat echoes across the arena as the community rises in respect, not just for warriors who went to war, but for those who came back with wisdom. They dance not just in memory of the fallen, but for the resilience of the people. In Montana, a Crow veteran started a youth mentorship program to teach young men the old ways, hunting, drumming, storytelling, alongside lessons on discipline, respect, and service. He said, "We can't undo the past, but we can build a new kind of warrior, one who knows who he is." In Arizona, a Navajo veteran named Mary, a former Army medic, founded a healing circle for Native women who served in the military. Some had endured sexual trauma. Others struggled with reintegration. Together, they sing, they pray, they walk in the morning light. She tells them, "We fought in combat. Now we fight for each other." But perhaps the most powerful movement of all is storytelling. Veterans are speaking. For too long they were told, "Don't talk about it." Now they're reclaiming their voice, not in anger, but in truth. At high schools, community centers, tribal colleges, Native veterans are sharing their stories with the next generation, not just the horrors, but the hopes, not just the pain, but the pride. They speak of boot camp, of the first time they saw the ocean, of the buddy they lost in a firefight, and the elder who prayed them home. They speak to remind young Native people, you belong, you have strength, you come from warriors. And the young are listening. In recent years, enlistment numbers among Native Americans remain high, not out of blind patriotism, but from a deep sense of responsibility. These youth don't see themselves as serving a government that failed their ancestors. They see themselves as serving their people, continuing a sacred path. They're creating a new generation of Native veterans, rooted in culture, informed by history, driven by service. And while much work remains, there is now movement. The VA is slowly expanding Native-specific outreach. Tribal liaison officers are being hired. Traditional medicine is being integrated into care. More Native vets are receiving the benefits they earned, and more are helping others find the way. Across the nation, walls of silence are cracking open, and through those cracks, stories rise of warriors, of loss, of love, of strength. So what do we remember in the end? We remember that Native American veterans served with honor, often without recognition. We remember that they carried not just rifles, but sacred prayers, that they wore not just camouflage, but generations of warrior tradition. We remember that they were asked to fight for a country that took their land, their language, their names, and they did it anyway, not out of obedience, but out of something deeper, out of identity, out of duty, out of love. If you've made it this far, you walked beside them. You've heard their footsteps, felt their silence, and now you carry a part of their story too. Subscribe to U.S. Veteran Tales, because these aren't just stories of the past. They are the soul of a people still standing, still proud, still here. We honor them not with words alone, but by remembering, by speaking, by listening, because forgotten soldiers deserve to be remembered.